Election laws across the United States have now been changed. And guess what? The biggest change from an executive order to Trump, requiring proof of citizenship to vote, meaning voter ID. However, this order sent shockwaves along partisan lines with legacy media. Many Democrat figures are criticizing it. They're saying it's going to disenfranchise voters. I'll be going to the details on what election order means today. Also, in other news, the Supreme Court has upheld regulations under the Biden administration to restrict so-called ghost guns. And also, Trump has now ordered the FBI to declassify documents on Crossfire hurricane. That's the whole case around the fake Trump-Russia allegation that basically hung over his entire first administration. Now, I'll be going to these topics and more today. Let's jump into it. Now, first of all, President Donald Trump has now changed the election laws across the United States. The March 25th executive order stipulates changes, including on proof of citizenship to vote in the U.S. And critics are arguing these changes are going to make it so that people are going to have to register to vote, and they say that's going to disenfranchise voters. They have to show ID now. They have to prove they're American citizens, and they're saying millions of people might not vote because of this. Now, I'm going to go into this order, what it means, but first, this is Trump talking about the need for proof of citizenship during a press conference earlier this week. Watch.
Our elections are very dishonest, very corrupt, and we have to straighten it out. And it's so easy to do it. And we should go to paper ballots. We should go to one-day voting. We should go to voter ID. And just one other thing, proof of a thing called citizenship in the United States. Wouldn't that be nice? How simple does that sound? Proof of citizenship, voter ID, one-day voting, and paper ballots. You know, paper ballots are very secure. They have watermark paper. It's very intricate stuff. It's very technologically advanced, even though it's paper. And you'd have no trouble. You wouldn't have dishonest elections, and you'd have them all done by 10 o'clock in the evening. You know, France went.
Now, this is the actual executive order officially from the White House. Let me show you what it says. It says this: despite pioneering self-government, the United States now fails to enforce basic and necessary election protections employed by modern developed nations, as well as those still developing. Trump goes in, gives some examples of, third world countries that have stronger election integrity than the United States. And he then goes on and says this: free, fair, and honest elections unmarred by fraud, errors, or suspicion are fundamental to maintaining our constitutional republic. The right of American citizens to have their votes properly counted and tabulated without illegal dilution is vital to determining the rightful winner of an election. Under the Constitution, state governments must safeguard American elections in compliance with federal laws that protect Americans' voting rights and guard against dilution by illegal voting, discrimination, fraud, and other forms of malfeasance and error. And he says, yet the United States has not adequately enforced federal election requirements. Laws already in place, which we'll get into in a bit, laws already in place that he says, for example, prohibit states from counting ballots received after Election Day or prohibit non-citizens from registering to vote. Now, the critics would say it doesn't happen that much. They say this is a drop in the bucket. Republicans would say drop in the bucket because you don't investigate it properly. Again, believe which side you want. But under this order, here's what's going to happen. When people go to register to vote now, they're going to have to show proof that they're actual U.S. citizens. Now, some people say this is basically voter ID. It's ID when you go to register. This could be a passport, a real ID, a military identification card, a local ID. Some states or cities give IDs, but it has to be something that affirms you're a U.S. citizen. And in addition to this, there are also going to be programs to identify anybody who has illegally registered to vote in different states. That includes people who maybe go to the kiosk at the DMV and when they ask you to register to vote and it says, are you a U.S. citizen, yes or no? Even if you're not, you might have clicked yes, you're going to be investigated with this. The order directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to ensure state and local officials can access systems to verify the citizenship and immigration status of registered voters. That means every registered voter is going to get the citizenship test. They're going to look at the data, and if it says this person is not a U.S. citizen, well, they might go after them. Now look, this could actually potentially help identify current registered voters who are not actually U.S. citizens, meaning cleaning the voter rolls, getting rid of those individuals from them, and maybe prosecuting them. It also directs the Secretary of State to ensure state and local officials are, quote, engaged in verifying the citizenship of individuals registering to vote or who are already registered, meaning this isn't just new registrations, it's existing voters. The DHS Secretary will also have to work with the DOJ administrator, that's Elon Musk in this case, to, quote, review each state's publicly available voter registration list and available records concerning voter list maintenance activities and to cross-reference all that data with the federal immigration database and state records requests, including through subpoenas if needed. Remember, the DOJ department under Musk, it's technically an organization that works on technology, data, and so on. And that organization is going to be working with DHS, other organizations, to get access to this information and then do a cross-check to make sure people are actually legally registered to vote and that there are no illegal registrations. They're basically opening the books up and they're reviewing every single one of them. And notes that within 90 days, that's 3 months from now, the DHS Secretary, Department of Homeland Security, will also have to give the U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi, information of any non-U.S. citizen who is found registered to vote at any level, whether it's federal, state, local elections, anything. And then take all appropriate action to submit to relevant state or local election officials such information. Meaning clean your voter rolls, get the illegal aliens off your voter rolls or other people. It doesn't end there either. Voter registration agencies will now have to assess citizenship prior to providing a federal voter registration form to enrollees on public assistance programs. Remember universal mail-in ballots? If they do that now, they're going to have to make sure they're not sending it to illegal immigrants. Also, the U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi, Justice Department, will be taking some strong actions to make sure non-U.S. citizens are not voting in our elections or registered to vote. And guess what? This will include Attorney General reviews, the Justice Department's going to look at it, of Homeland Security databases, state-issued IDs, because, New York, a lot of states have state ID, and driver's license databases, which do ask you to register to vote, and also, as they say, similar records relating to citizenship. They're opening the books on all of this. And all of this also includes an element of enforcement. It notes in the official order, quote, the Attorney General shall, consistent with applicable laws, coordinate with state attorneys general to assist with state-level review and prosecution of aliens unlawfully registered to vote or casting votes. Meaning, if there's an illegal immigrant and they have voted, they may be prosecuted, but it's not limited to that. If there's an illegal alien and they have registered to vote, it means that they could also face prosecution. This is not even limited to illegal aliens. This could be green card holders, aliens in general, foreign individuals who are not U.S. citizens. And there's even more to it. This also includes orders to review voter rolls. This includes looking at social security numbers, death files to look for dead people. Because in 2020, there were a lot of allegations of dead people being used to vote. And also other databases like this. Whether you believe this is nefarious or not, a lot of states do not clean their voter rolls, and there are old records on them. This will look into that. It also includes requirements for states to use official national voter registration forms with requirements for ballots to make it so the vote is not contained in a barcode or a quick response code. In other words, standardized documents for elections, no more just whoever wants to do a voter registration form coming out, doing whatever it wants. They have to use official ones now. They can't just do it from the state level, do whatever they want. And there's also an order to recertify voting systems. And of course, that applies to all existing technology used at various voting locations. All of it needs to be recertified to be able to be used. And it says they're going to, quote, rescind all previous certifications of voting equipment based on prior standards. All of it, all the machines, everything will likely be reviewed. And there's also a very large section on here on, quote, prosecuting election crimes. And this could be election fraud, it could be issues with voter registration, it could be people who gave false information while registering to vote or otherwise may need to lie about being a U.S. citizen. It could mean threatening or intimidating voters or even election officials or other things. So they're going to actually be going after people on this who are accused of election fraud or accused of anything along those lines. And there are also other requirements on election equipment, checking for problems of malicious software or unauthorized intrusions of election equipment. And that's going to be a big thing because that will require review of the actual software and systems used in the elections. And also other orders, including having a national election day, making sure that California is not counting its votes like a month after the elections, and making sure a toilet doesn't overflow in Georgia and shut down the entire election, and things like that. They're going to have systems in place to prevent that now. A national election day. One day, done, boom, votes are in, and nothing after that. And also on preventing foreign interference, including with the use of funding. No foreign donations, no foreign money, no outside influence on the American election system. So, in other words, take this across the board. This basically addresses most of the concerns with the election that Donald Trump has been raising going back to the 2020 elections. This will require a review of effectively almost everything he alleged took place. And according to White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt during a press conference yesterday, Trump also wants Congress to move on election integrity as well. Watch.
As for the election integrity executive order that the president signed yesterday, this is in an effort to restore trust in American elections. There were more than 10 steps taken, 10 executive actions taken throughout this one order. It directs the department, or the attorney general rather, in Homeland Security to prevent non-citizens from any involvement in administering elections. There's also another host of actions. We can provide the fact sheet for you, but it's a very strong election integrity executive order, and the president would also like to see Congress do something about this very important issue.
Well, that would be important because Congress needs to act if this is going to become law. Otherwise, it's just an executive order, meaning it's easily overturned in the future. So we'll see. But this could potentially lead to a lot more actions on elections in the near future, especially if the Trump administration does move forward, carry out these investigations, and if they uncover anything major, it could force Congress to follow this with legislation, or maybe arrest some people. But look, this will not go without challenges. In fact, challenges are already coming up. The order sent shockwaves basically along partisan lines, at least so far. Legacy media, the big corporate media, a lot of Democrat figures, they're criticizing this. They're saying it could disenfranchise voters. And they argue this also oversteps the basic jurisdiction of the federal government when it comes to state powers on election laws. This has been a long-term debate in the United States as well. Where does federal power end and where does state power begin, especially when it's up to states to, secure their own elections? The argument for the Trump side is states have to secure their elections in line with federal law. What he's saying is existing federal law was not being followed. We'll see what happens. The Guardian says this, though. It says Donald Trump has signed a far-reaching executive order that promises to fundamentally disrupt American voter registration processes, introducing measures, it says, so restrictive they could, in effect, disenfranchise millions of citizens if enacted. I assume they mean U.S. citizens, but citizens, right? It says the sweeping order amends the federal voter registration form to require proof of citizenship in order to vote. It demands documentary proof for citizenship, such as a passport, to be eligible to vote in federal elections, empowers federal agencies to cut funding to states deemed non-compliant, and instructs the Department of Justice to prosecute what the White House paints as election crimes. Imagine that, prosecuting election crimes, cutting funding to states that don't follow federal law, and requiring citizenship to vote. They're saying this is a disaster. This will fundamentally disrupt the election process. And they note this: the measure also seeks to block states from accepting mail-in ballots after Election Day. One-day voting, right? Regardless of when they are mailed in. Better get them in before that day happens. And it also notes this, basically another one, Democracy Docket, tied in with legal organizations, also responded to Trump's orders, and they're saying there could soon be lawsuits challenging Donald Trump on this. Democracy Docket says this: the Democratic election lawyer, Mark Elias, was among those who said he will sue over Trump's order. And Democratic election officials quickly decried the order. Now, Elias is the founder of Democracy Docket, and it notes this: Trump's order in general attempts to make registering and remaining registered to vote more difficult. It directs the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, an agency created by Congress to operate without direct control from the White House, to require eligible voters to provide documentary proof of their citizenship when registering through a federal registration form. The change would prevent Americans, it says, who lack easy access to such documents, such as a passport, from registering to vote through the National Mail Voter Registration Form, which was originally created to make registering to vote more accessible. It notes as well, the order also directs that states which accept ballots that arrive after Election Day, a common practice used in states like California, Illinois, and Nevada, would lose federal funds to support their election operations. And the order charges Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, and the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, with using federal databases to review state voter registration lists. As part of this effort, DOGE and DHS can subpoena state records to prove supposed voter registration fraud. Oh, the humanity, right? We'll see what this overturns. There's going to be a lot of challenges to it, as we've seen with the way Trump has been operating. Even if a judge, a Hawaiian judge somewhere or a DC judge orders Trump to stop this immediately and return all the voter forms or whatever, they've been kind of ignoring a lot of that as it goes up through the legal system. This will very likely eventually, as it often does, go to the Supreme Court, and we will see where they rule. Now look, on the side of legal challenges though, the executive order has sections explaining the supposed legalities. It seems that Donald Trump already kind of anticipated the legal challenges. He lays these out. And we can expect these to be the legal arguments used by the Trump administration when it comes to the expected challenges to the order. This is the White House document again, and here's what it says. It says federal law establishes a uniform election day, this is American law, across the nation for federal elections. That's 2 U.S.C. 1 and 3 U.S.C. 1. They say it is the policy of my administration to enforce those statutes and require that votes be cast and received by the election date established in law. No exceptions, no 30 days to get your votes in. You have to do it that one day. No finding random bins of votes like in the trunk of a car, none of that. And they say, as the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit recently held in Republican National Committee v. Wetzel, 2024, those statutes set by, quote, the day by which ballots must be both cast by voters and received by state officials. Yet numerous states fail to comply with those laws by counting ballots received after Election Day, suggesting again laws are in place, the laws have not been followed. And it says this as well. Several federal laws, including 18 U.S.C. 1015 and 611, prohibit foreign nationals from registering to vote or voting in federal elections. Important caveat here, this is federal elections. There are some states that allow non-U.S. citizens to vote in local elections. But federal elections, it is banned by law. They add this, yet states fail to adequately to vet voters' citizenship, and in recent years the Department of Justice has failed to prioritize and devote sufficient resources for enforcement of these provisions. The concern being if some U.S. states or local communities or whatever in local elections allow non-U.S. citizens to vote in local elections, what steps are being taken to ensure those same registered voters are not voting in federal elections when the states restrict the providing of information to verify U.S. citizen or non-U.S. citizen? That is the concern. A lot of states that allow the registration of voters who are not American citizens do not require proof. They eliminate that. And if they eliminate it, how do you know if people are not voting in federal elections as well? That's where federal law comes in. Trump's alleging that's not being followed. And they say this, even worse, the prior administration actively prevented states from removing aliens from their voter lists, which there were some cases on that's actually legitimate. And he adds further in, additionally, federal laws such as the National Voter Registration Act, Public Law 103-31, and the Help America Vote Act, Public Law 107-252, require states to maintain an accurate and current statewide list of every legally registered voter in the state. The important language there, current and every legally registered voter. The problem is a lot of states don't clear their voting rolls. And so if you have people who live in a state, they move out of state, they might still be on the voter roll. If they died, they might still be on the voter roll. If they were illegal aliens and they registered and they shouldn't have, and there's no review of it, they might still be on the voter roll. And that's, some people argue, maybe not much of a problem because, you know, you go to vote and only people who go to vote, only then does it matter. The concern would be that people are using other people's names, and they allege there's not a lot of cases of that, believe which side you want. But the other big issue is when you have things like universal mail-in ballots, and they start sending, you know, ballots to every registered voter, which includes out-of-state people, dead people, illegal aliens, and whatever else, with no vetting process. The point here is that law would require states to maintain current and legally registered voters in their voter rolls. And it adds this, and the Department of Homeland Security is required to share database information with states upon request so they can fulfill this duty. Meaning DHS has to work with states on it. They've not really done it. They say C8 USC 1373C. Maintaining accurate voter registration lists is a fundamental requirement in protecting voters from having their ballots voided or diluted by fraudulent votes. It also notes federal law 52 USC 3121 prohibits foreign nationals from participating in federal, state, or local elections by making any contributions or expenditures. No campaign donations, no funding organizations that are engaged in our elections. But it says foreign nationals and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, have taken advantage of loopholes in the law's interpretation, spending millions of dollars through conduit contributions and ballot initiative-related expenditures. They don't donate directly to the elections, but they donate to third-party organizations engaged in the elections as if they were funding them directly. And they say this type of foreign interference in our election process undermines the franchise and right of American citizens to govern their republic. Big stuff, folks. Expect there to be a lot of legal challenges on that. Get ready for the storm, so to speak, on this. And also expect to see some information revealed if and when the actual investigations happen. The big question here is if, because there's going to be a lot of people trying to stop that, as we've seen over the last, more than 4 years, 5 years now. But look, in other news, the Supreme Court has upheld regulations under the Biden administration to restrict so-called ghost guns. Epoch Times says this. The Supreme Court voted 7-2, meaning overwhelmingly the Supreme Court voted to uphold the Biden-era law The Supreme Court voted 7-2 on March 26 to uphold the Biden administration's rule regulating so-called ghost guns that can be assembled at home. The majority opinion in Bondi v. Vanderstock was written by Justice Neil Gorsuch. It says, ghost gun is a pejorative term used by gun control advocates to describe a homemade firearm that lacks a serial number and therefore cannot be tracked by law enforcement. It's a ghost on the system. And it says, although some states regulate homemade guns, gun control groups have been trying for years to ban or regulate homemade guns at the federal level, but have failed to persuade the U.S. Congress to act. Then President Joe Biden defended the rule, claiming that privately made guns, which are often made with gun kits, are the weapon of choice for many criminals. The government's frame or receiver rule dates to April 2022. It's not that old. And it requires individuals who assemble homemade firearms to add serial numbers to them. It notes the rule also mandates background checks for consumers who buy gun assembly kits from dealers. Pieces of guns that are shipped are nonetheless guns subject to existing laws, and the government argued. What does that mean? Basically, this regulates gun parts as if they were finished firearms. And that was the big debate on this. If someone buys a lower, right, or you 3D print a lower, which is like the part with the trigger on a gun. A lot of people buy those, or they buy like the part and they just drill it themselves. There's different steps to it. You can basically buy these. You can use a 3D printer to print one yourself in the privacy of your own home. And then you can buy kits to get the barrel and the stock and everything else, and you can build a complete gun. You can build some pretty high quality firearms with this, which is why a lot of people like to do it. Some people do it because they're hobbyists. Some people do it because they just want to have a gun. Some people do it because they're criminals, and that's the argument with it. Now, the challenge with this is what defines a gun and how does the government actually regulate firearms? Because as we know in the Constitution, Congress is forbidden to create laws that would restrict the free ownership of firearms. The way they often restrict firearms is by restricting the purchase of firearms. Meaning, of course, if you want to buy a gun, there are many regulations in place to make that difficult for you. And so the question is, well, I'm not buying a gun, I'm buying parts of a gun. And how do you basically regulate that, especially if it's a lower and it's effectively just a block of steel or a block of metal or a block of plastic? How do you regulate that? Can you say that that is a gun? Well, yes. Now, according to law, they're saying that's effectively a gun. And, you know, again, this is overwhelmingly majority of the Supreme Court, a 7-2 vote upholding this. And so the Biden era restrictions on your ability to build your own firearms is in place. Now, it's not absolutely restrictive. You still, you can do a background check on it if you're buying the parts, or if you 3D print one or buy a lower, you just got to add a serial number to it. But what that means is every gun is going to have to be on the system. There's no guns outside the system, and that's what they've done. Now, look, on another topic, President Donald Trump has now ordered the FBI to declassify documents on Crossfire hurricane. That was the whole case around the whole fake Trump-Russia allegation. And we can call it fake because it was affirmed as being fake towards the end of his first term in office. That whole thing, it hung over the 2016 elections, undermined his first term as president. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick 1-minute break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment. a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Investigations and documents on those about Crossfire hurricane could soon be made public. Now, what's happening right now, President Donald Trump has ordered the FBI to declassify documents on the whole case around the fake Trump-Russia allegations that hung over the 2016 elections, probably undermine his entire first term in office as president, undermine the midterm elections, and was eventually proven to be fake. It was opposition research. Now, the result of what Special Counsel John Durham eventually referred to as confirmation bias. He did not recommend criminal charges, even though he affirmed the whole thing was fake, and the truth only came out just before the 2020 elections. Here's what the order from the White House titled Immediate Declassification of Materials Related to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Crossfire Hurricane Investigation says. This is the White House. By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, I hereby direct the following. Trump says, quote, except as provided below, I have determined that all of the materials referenced in the presidential memorandum of January 19, 2021, declassification of certain materials related to the FBI's Crossfire hurricane investigation are no longer classified. I have further determined that the material proposed for redaction by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and a cover letter dated January 17, 2021 remains classified. Now on this, here's more from Fox News. It says, after signing the order, Trump said that now the media can review previously withheld files pertaining to the investigation, although he cast doubt on whether many journalists would do so. It notes the FBI on July 31st, 2016, opened a counterintelligence investigation into whether Trump, then a presidential candidate, or members of his campaign were colluding or coordinating with Russia to influence the 2016 election. That investigation was referred to inside the Bureau, FBI, as Crossfire Hurricane. It says further in, it was eventually determined that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, funded the dossier that started the whole thing, funded the dossier through the law firm Perkins Coie. Now look, we'll see if the declassification actually changes anything. The Crossfire Hurricane investigation, it involved a lot of people. This was elected officials, this was journalists, this was law firms, this was many government agents, this was even some foreign actors, even foreign sources. Now they used this fake opposition research, spread it among the intelligence community, spread it among the FBI, gave it out to elected officials in Congress, and then it was used to get FISA warrants to spy on Donald Trump and his team when he was still a candidate. That included when Trump was still in the campaign trail. Remember when Trump said they, wiretapped, they bugged Mar-a-Lago or Trump Tower? That was part of it. It turned out they were spying on him. Now, the scandal around the allegations were also used to effectively undermine his entire first term in office. They tried to impeach him using it. They constantly had hit pieces in the media about it. Trump is a Russian agent, all those things. It very likely impacted the outcome of the 2018 midterm elections by disenfranchising voters or convincing them that Trump was a Russian asset, and just caused overall chaos. It led to hit pieces in the news on an ongoing basis. People were mass protesting on the streets. It caused chaos in America, and the whole thing was fake. Now, it's not clear whether the document release could actually lead to any criminal charges. This is the other side with it. The idea of criminal charges, that was already mostly determined through the investigations of former special counsel John Durham. And Durham, he concluded the whole Trump-Russia scandal, it was fake. People say, well, it wasn't all fake. It was all fake. They never affirmed any of the main allegations. You could say Trump lived in Trump Tower. Yeah, that was true. But the allegations, every one of them was fake. None of it was proven true. And so when the truth came out on this, John Durham did not recommend criminal charges. And the reason he gave to not recommend them, his conclusion, was that it came about as a lot of confirmation bias, right? The allegations aligned with suspicions people had or personal existing bias people had against Trump. And so they believed Trump was guilty. They started from that starting point. Everything fit in with the narrative they believed to be true. And so they continued to investigate him, try to remove him from office, protested, rioted, the whole 9 yards, believing it was true because they wanted it so badly to be true. Confirmation bias. That was the exact phrase given to not suggest criminal prosecutions. And so, look, the allegation is there. There was no malicious intent involved. That's the allegation. That does not mean that the Justice Department could determine otherwise. The conclusions from the special counsel's office, they're recommendations. They're not like official legal doctrine. So the Department of Justice could still prosecute some individuals. But we'll see. And look, we'll have to see if the information release actually changes anything as well. Look, a lot of this was already made public. We're going to get, what will be significant with this is we'll get the behind-the-scenes assessments and the behind-the-scenes interviews and so on. We'll basically get a lot of evidence that was not publicly available before. Now, in other news, folks, in addition to this, the FBI has also now provided Congress with information on the 2017 shooting at the Congressional baseball game. It's crazy this has kind of left the public memory, but you might remember 2017, an individual tried killing Republican lawmakers in what could have been a mass shooting event. He shot one elected official, actually injured him pretty badly. It was life-threatening. He survived. And then that shooter was shot and killed by a security guard before he could carry out more actions. Luckily, there was one security guard there who saved the lives of most, again, Republicans who were at a Republican baseball game. These were your members of Congress. FBI Director Kash Patel said this, "I can report that as of 30 minutes ago, the FBI has provided the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence all requested documents related to the Congressional baseball game shooting in 2017. These are documents sought by Capitol Hill officials for almost 8 years. Providing these documents was one of our top priorities in delivering a new FBI era of transparency. Thank you to the committee chairman and also Representative Rick Crawford, for your partnership in getting Americans the truth." Now, remember what happened here. The shooter did not manage to kill anybody, but he did shoot and wound very seriously Congressman Steve Scalise. The bullet hit him in the hip, traveled across his pelvis. It also took place amid the wave of other violent threats. You might remember there were weird things. Republican members of Congress were on a train. Somebody brought a dump truck and left it on the train tracks. Now, some people say that was an accident. Some people say it was an assassination attempt. But that was also very closely aligned with a shooter who tried killing Republican members of Congress. And this was also amid the violent protests, mass incidents, and so on, which people were using to try to remove Donald Trump from office, and also the whole Crossfire hurricane thing. As a reminder, this is where things were at back in 2017. This is NPR. It says the Wednesday shooting, at the time 2017, at a Virginia baseball field that critically wounded Louisiana GOP Representative Steve Scalise and at least 4 others shook Washington. Members of Congress were breaking into tears talking about the event. It says, but the violent outburst, while shocking and distressing, was not a complete surprise. Threats and aggression towards members of Congress, mostly Republicans at the time, have gotten a lot of press in recent months, notably at town hall style events, and especially related to the health care debate. Because remember, you had a lot of, when they say the health care debate, what they mean is, of course, pro-abortion advocates who were effectively threatening to kill members of Congress and carrying on other things like that because they were angry Donald Trump had gotten elected. There were a lot of things like that taking place. You could argue a member of Congress being shot, more members of Congress were injured that day than the entire incident on January 6th. Again, the only people who died on January 6th, one was Ashley Babbitt, a Trump supporter, shot and killed while trying to climb through a window. You had 2 other people die of heart incidents. You had one woman, Roseanne Boyland, who was suffocated, crushed. They said she died of a medication overdose, but she was crushed and then beaten over the head while she was unconscious by a police officer. No members of Congress were injured, no police were killed, but again, that's framed as a bigger issue than this gunner who tried murdering an entire group of Republican lawmakers. And we never got information on that. We're now going to get the information on that after 8 years of them trying to get it. That said, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. All right, see here, first question. Science Chick 72, you said, I'm in favor of citizenship proof for voting. However, will Trump's executive order stand up in court because the Constitution clearly says that states determine place, time, and manner of election. Otherwise, Congress must pass laws. That's going to be the legal argument. And look, you know, when Biden was president and Biden did make some laws regulating the elections, Republicans were also challenging Joe Biden's ability to change election laws because he was president. I'm giving purely my own interpretation of the Constitution and where this stands. Federal elections are more managed by the federal government. And so if you're dealing with federal voter registration, that is federal. States basically can have people register to vote in federal elections. They have to use federal forms. That's a federal database. It's not a state database. And so that process does tie in with something that is within the jurisdiction of the federal government. The place, time, manner of election, that basically comes down to how they create places to vote, what time to vote, how long it takes to count the votes, those types of things. Trump is arguing that there are existing federal election laws that place some restrictions on that, because he's saying effectively that states, yes, they have to make sure the elections take place, but they have to take place within the laws of the federal government. This is why you don't have presidential elections a year before. This is why you don't have presidential elections a year after. There are some standards that stipulate, you know, the kind of the big picture stuff that states have to follow. That's the argument with it. Now, I think Trump understands that he can't change everything at the local level, which is why there was this stipulation that some things they do have jurisdiction over. They can, for example, have the Department of Justice audit, review voter rolls, see if there are non-citizens voting. States are going to have a hard time pushing back against that. Local elections, if there are illegal aliens or aliens voting, registering to vote for state or local elections, you know, you're voting for your city council member or your mayor. If a state determines that it's legal, they can kind of do it. New York just had a big debate on this, for example. It was determined eventually that under the New York Constitution, the state constitution, non-U.S. citizens cannot vote in elections, but there are other states that do it. You know, California's been pushing for this. A lot of others have been pushing for it. The federal government does not have total jurisdiction over that. The difference is local election versus federal election. Now, on the point of voter ID, proof of citizenship, the other argument they're going to have, they have what they call real ID now. I don't know if any of you have flown recently. If you want to fly in an airplane now, you have to either show real ID or you have to show a passport. It used to be that you could show your driver's license. You had to show some type of identity. Now you actually have to show a real ID or a passport. The real ID or passport would include proof of citizenship. And I know there were some loopholes with that. You know, for a long time, illegal aliens were able to show papers and effectively be able to fly without having to show a driver's license or normal ID. There were exceptions made for that. Those have been largely overturned now. They can no longer do that. But the argument they're going to have is that if you have to show real ID to fly or a passport to fly, then anybody who would be held under that should also be held under the same things with registering to vote in our elections. They could argue all they want about racial discrimination or whatever else, but if they do that, they'd have to make the same argument against flying in an airplane and TSA, and that's not like a Trump era thing. This has been in place for a while now. They've been rolling this out. Anyways, we'll see. I think we can expect a lot of legal challenges with this, without a doubt. And so it's not going to be clear cut. You also might see you might not see an absolute one way or the other determination at the end. There might be some kind of gray area decision, but I think we will probably watch serious investigations now taking place into the way the elections were handled, into possible voter fraud, because they're going to be investigating that. And I believe that if there are criminal investigations and they overturn anything big, aside from people possibly facing criminal prosecution, going to prison for it, you could also, if the information uncovered is serious enough, you could see that lending to the credibility of the need for these types of security measures. And so the wild card here is if somebody actually does get found guilty for massive voter fraud of some kind, which they're going to be looking into now. Mockingjay, you're saying, in theory, I support the right to own ghost guns, but I don't think I trust my own gun-making skills. Yeah. I like the idea of ghost guns, more because I would view it as a hobby. I know some guys, they'll buy lowers and they just kind of keep them. Unless you assemble the gun, there are some legal loopholes with that. If you just have a lower laying around and you haven't drilled it yet or something like that, they can't really, as far as I understand, they can't really get you on that. Depending on the state. Some states are very strict with it, so don't take my word on that. Some states are very strict with that. But you have a lot of hobbyists who make really cool guns. And I've always been interested in that. I think it's very interesting. You can make on your own, getting gun kits, really nice guns, things that would normally cost a lot of money. But go and watch some videos of people who build them wrong, and it's kind of scary. You will see videos of guys 3D printing their gun and the thing blows up in their hands. It is kind of terrifying. Some people, when they build a gun like this, they'll build contraptions and they'll pull the trigger with a string attached to the trigger so that it doesn't blow up and take their hand off with it or blow up in your face. It can kill you. It's really serious. It's no joke. And so you build it wrong, you drill it wrong, you do something wrong, you can kill yourself or someone else. And so it is a dangerous hobby. The other side with ghost guns is that when you're dealing with criminals and gang members from a lot of the countries we're now flooding the United States with, ghost guns, or what they call zip guns, are really common in those countries. In a lot of Latin America, there are actually very strict gun laws. Mexico has very strict gun laws. Kind of funny, they have massive gun violence, but they have very strict gun laws. Brazil has very strict gun laws. They have massive gun violence, but very, very strict gun laws. Bolsonaro tried overturning that a bit, which ironically led to a drop in crime because good people could finally get guns to defend themselves. But what you find in some countries, like Brazil, a lot of the gang members, they build what are called zip guns. And I mean, they're kind of stupid looking, but they work. They'll get like a piece of pipe, and they'll get a piece of wood, and they'll tie the wood to the pipe, and they'll get a bullet, maybe a shotgun shell or just a bullet, and they'll get like a screw or a nail to work as the hammer to hit the back of the bullet, and they build a trigger mechanism just using that. If you ever look at crack house traps, if you look in like law enforcement stuff, when you have these meth heads in their trailers and they're cooking meth, they build things like that. They'll get shotgun shell. They'll drill a hole in a mouse trap. They'll put a shotgun shell in it, and they'll put a nail on the mouse trap. And so when they'll put a string on it like a trap. And police have to be really careful when they're investigating these areas because they're booby trapped a lot of times. You hit that string, it triggers the mousetrap. The mousetrap springs, hits the back of that bullet, and boom, a shotgun shell goes off. You would call those you would call those zip guns. There are people who build them out of like little pipes, all kinds of stuff. The problem we have in America right now is, they say ghost guns are kind of the gun of choice of criminals. Even though I'm relatively, very pro-Second Amendment, I totally understand where they're coming from because it's kind of true. That Luigi guy, the guy who killed the healthcare CEO, he used a zip gun. Or I think he used a 3D printed gun. Luigi Mangiano, right? They have some very good 3D printed guns as well. And this is kind of the new issue that's coming about. You can 3D print a kind of very good gun. And so even people without the skills to build a firearm, you can download online the 3D schematics to just print your own. And there are hobbyist groups that do it. And so it's really hard for it's hard for police to deal with this. I like to interpret gun laws through the lens of a law-abiding citizen. Myself, I would view it as a hobby. I think the idea to be able to make cool vintage guns, just by buying the parts for them or gun kits, I just think it's cool, right? I would love to be able to do it. You're not going to do it here because the laws are really strict on that, but I would love to be able to because I think it's a cool hobby. But there are people who will misuse it. And I understand critics would bring that up, and there is some validity to it. In all honesty, there is a valid argument with it because you do see a lot of gangs and a lot of alien gangs that we're now flooding our country or have flooded our country with, where they do those things in their own countries, and it's very common. And so it has introduced a lot of new problems that I would rather us not have, unfortunately. Jeremy Barker, you're saying, Joshua, not a single person who did this promote/generate this fake information was ever held accountable except for the low-level lawyer who did the FISA warrant. You're talking about Crossfire Hurricane, right? So Crossfire Hurricane, the Trump-Russia investigations. Look, I was one of the journalists who exposed that a lot of that looked fake from the get-go. And I can tell you how my investigation started. Okay, let's go back in time, folks. Trump is about to be elected president. He's on the campaign trail, 2016, 2017. What happens? WikiLeaks. Do you remember WikiLeaks? It was that organization that used to get leaked documents and just publish them online. They get government documents, State Department documents. They had the Iraq files. Julian Assange was still making his rounds. He's facing a lot of challenges right now. WikiLeaks released documents from the DNC and from the Clinton campaign. He had Hillary Clinton's emails, right? Now, what had happened is when he released the emails, the question was, well, how did these get released? They had other things too. There was actually another breach of, allegedly, of the Open Society Foundation, the George Soros organization, released a lot of their files as well. So there were hackers or insiders who got these files and then published them online. The allegation among Democrats was this release represents an undermining of the elections. Now, to paint a comparison to this, the same thing happened to Trump in the recent elections, in the 2020 elections. Hackers allegedly with Iran, by the way, stole the Trump assessment of J.D. Vance. They then released the Trump assessment of J.D. Vance to journalists. Some of those journalists, left-wing journalists, published them publicly. Now, they did that basically without any kind of repercussion. But going back to 2016, 2017, it was a scandal. It was a massive scandal. There were different assessments on whether it was actually a cyber attack that stole it or whether it was an insider. The FBI, the intelligence communities did an investigation on the nature of the alleged breach, and they released a document alleging that a cyber attack had resulted in the hacking and stealing of documents from the Clinton campaign, the DNC, and so on. Now, at that time, I was a reporter, and I was heavily focused on cybersecurity. And so I would often, because at that time that was a big deal. People thought, remember 2010 to like 2017, there were a lot of stories about big cybersecurity breaches, and it was kind of a new thing. It was a big deal. Now, I was used to reading assessments of cyber attacks, so I knew how those documents looked. I knew what they looked like when they were legitimate. The document that was released assessing the breach of the Clinton campaign servers was not normal. It was not normal. And actually, this has never been really addressed publicly. This is what they did. And this is what made me being like, what am I reading? Like, what is this? Okay, so let's talk about what a normal breach looks like. And this led to a lot of the questions of, well, was it an insider? Was it somebody working with the campaign who stole the documents and then released them publicly? This is what raised the concerns over that. Was it not a cyber attack, right? Was it somebody who was on the inside who stole them? If you deal with normal assessments of a cyber attack, they have full breakdowns of really complicated stuff of networks and how the breach took place, and they're pretty comprehensive. As a journalist, anytime I want to get involved in a new beat, I will actually learn my beat. This is one of my maybe unique traits as a journalist. And so when I started working on cybersecurity, I learned to code. I know it's like a meme now to tell journalists learn to code. I learned to code. I actually did. And I also took some classes to learn cybersecurity, how to hack and that kind of stuff, because I wanted to have an understanding of how to actually report these things, and I didn't want to be like some clueless journalist, pretending like I understood what I was reading. I wanted to know what I was reading. So I learned cybersecurity, I learned coding, I learned how to do that stuff. The normal documents give you a breakdown of how hacks took place. The one they released on the Clinton server hack was not normal. What it did was this. The first part of the document was an assessment basically saying the servers were hacked, it was a cybersecurity breach. And the second part, where you normally have the breakdown of how the hack took place, it did not include any evidence of an actual hack. It didn't have it. And that's not normal. They normally never do that. Instead of giving a breakdown of how a hack took place, what they did instead was explained in really technical terms how cybersecurity operations like that normally happen. There was no evidence of a breach. There was no breakdown of a breach. There was no process like that. They didn't include any of that. All they said was there was a breach, and here's hypothetically how these types of cyber attacks work. And I think for a lot of journalists who frankly have no idea what they're talking about, I again went through the nuts and bolts of learning it. A lot of journalists, when they go and read the breakdown of a cybersecurity breach, it's like a foreign language. It's technical talk. And it looks legitimate. So a lot of people, I think, would read the first half and be like, oh, it was breached. And then they read the second half, and then it would just blow over their heads. And they'd be like, okay, that looks good enough to me. But I brought up the concern to my editor at the time, and I was like, this is not normal. They don't actually give evidence on their claims. There was no evidence on the claims. And I was like, I don't know if this is normal. And that led us to, start investigating it. Some of you, if you subscribed to Epoch Times during that time, you might remember we had some really good investigative reporting on that whole breach, on FISA spying, on Spygate and all that stuff. We did a lot of really good breakdowns investigating that because it was spurred into motion by the fact that the reports didn't line up. The reporting did not line up. Something was off. And I don't need to tell you all again, we got attacked like you wouldn't believe for reporting the truth. And still getting attacked like you wouldn't believe for reporting the truth. I think we got a few people mad at us for that. But again, what are you going to do? It was, it's journalism, right? I think it's going to be interesting that this is going to be coming out now. I think it's going to be interesting that they're going to be maybe releasing some of that information. I'm personally curious of what they actually include in it. And I will be interested in seeing if I got the story right back then, because that seems to also be the pattern. I can proudly say in most of my investigative work, I have not had to publish corrections, not on any major stuff at least. That includes the assessment on COVID-19 as well, by the way, as many of you maybe also remember with my documentary on that. And January 6th, right, on that too. That said, folks, let's see, another question. Vince B., you're saying, question, do you have any info on the arrest of the top MS-13 member found south of D.C., Washington, D.C.? I did see Kash Patel, FBI Director Kash Patel. He just this morning, or it was this morning or like late last night, I saw his tweet on it. Kash Patel announced the FBI has arrested a top member of MS-13. I don't know what the significance of that is, other than the fact that it's a big deal. They arrested a top leader of MS-13. They've actually been getting arrests like that for a while now. I've seen several tweets from Kash Patel saying they've arrested a top member of MS-13. They've arrested some in New York. This one was in Washington, D.C. They've arrested some in some other places. And so it seems that they're going after, I don't know, you call them the shot callers. You would normally call them, I believe. These gang shot callers. They're the guys who call the shots, right? They're actually going after them now, which is great to see. I hope they get all of them, frankly. I should note, too, Kash Patel, the current FBI director, Kash Patel, he was also one of the first people to expose a lot of those issues and put himself in a very difficult position because of it, which is why I assume Trump appointed him to his position. Kash Patel was one of the first whistleblowers in the agencies. He was one of the first whistleblowers on the whole Spygate thing. I believe he was actually the person who told Trump he was being spied on. Kash Patel was number one on that. And also Kash was, number one on a lot of the issues with the truth around January 6th. Kash Patel was one of the first to blow the whistles on a lot of these big issues that got a lot of people attacked. And so I do believe that his role as the director of the FBI, I think he understands this stuff extremely well. I mean, better than me, right? Because he was in the government, he was in the administration, and he was able to view these things. He also had the integrity to blow the whistle, to make it public, to warn the President of the United States at the time. And so I believe Kash Patel, I believe that he is probably better placed than probably anybody to be carrying out these investigations. So we'll see what he uncovers. That said, folks, James, you're saying, why don't I have Kash Patel on for a special episode? Kash, if you're watching, you have an open invitation on Crossroads. Kash would be welcome on the show any day of the week. But, we'll see if that ever happens. Because, he's the FBI director. You need to maintain some degree of separation from the media usually. Although I would love to have him on. I would love to have him on if he could do it. All right, folks, that said, it's Thursday. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time again for another episode of Crossroads. That said, please give us a like this video, share this video. It helps us a lot. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.